I placed the envelope beside his plate as he announced he was selling our home for his girlfriend. He didn't know I'd already taken it from him. Hey there. Glad you're here. Whatever you're doing right now, take a breath and settle in. Because today's story, it's about what happens when a woman's entire world is flipped over by the person she trusted most. Have you ever been in a situation where you gave someone everything and they walked away like it meant nothing? Or maybe you've watched someone you love find the strength to stop shrinking and start standing tall. If that hits close to home, or even just tugs at something inside, stick around until the end. And hey, if stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing. It helps me keep bringing you real, raw, and powerful moments that deserve to be heard. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in.
I still remember the way the gravy smelled that afternoon, like rosemary, butter, and denial. Thanksgiving was supposed to be perfect that year. I'd spent 3 days prepping, chopping root vegetables like my life depended on it, brining a turkey that could have won state fair awards, and polishing my grandmother's china until my hands hurt. My name is Madeline Pierce, and I had no idea that my 23rd Thanksgiving as a wife would also be my last. But let me rewind, just a bit. Our house in Mill Creek, Ohio wasn't much on the outside, brick colonial with a leaky porch light and a tire swing out back. But on the inside, it held 20 years of memories. My children, Evan and Chloe, had flown home for the holiday, he from Denver, she from her dorm in Vermont. For one fleeting moment, everything felt like the hallmark version of life I used to pray for. Until Richard, my husband of over 2 decades, stood up in the middle of dinner and cleared his throat like he was giving a TED Talk. "I've decided," he said, lifting his glass of wine as if to toast, "to sell the house. Vanessa and her kids need more space." The silence that followed was biblical. Chloe's fork slipped from her hand. Evan blinked like he'd just been slapped. Vanessa. He said her name like I didn't exist, like this wasn't our home, but some asset to be liquidated. And her kids? What about ours? What about the life we'd built inside these walls? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached slowly for my water glass, took a sip, and stood up. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept unpaid parking tickets and chapstick, and pulled out a cream-colored envelope I'd been holding onto for weeks. When I returned, Richard was still standing, one eyebrow raised like he was the victim. "Since we're making announcements," I said, placing the envelope beside his plate, "I have one too." He didn't reach for it. He didn't speak. But Chloe's eyes flicked to mine, sharp and wide with recognition, and Evan's jaw tightened as he looked at his father like he'd never seen him before. And just like that, the countdown began. Richard didn't touch the envelope poidang that night. He sat stiffly in his chair like it might explode if he moved. Chloe eventually got up and started clearing dishes in silence, her face unreadable. Evan stayed frozen, eyes fixed on his father like he was watching a stranger break into our house and try to rearrange the furniture. I took my seat again, slow and measured, and returned to my plate. The stuffing was cold by then, but I didn't care. I wasn't eating for nourishment, I was eating to send a message. I'm still here. I'm not folding. Not tonight. It took exactly 17 hours for the questions to begin. The next morning, I found Richard in his usual spot at the kitchen island, tapping away at his iPad like he was solving world hunger. He glanced at me over the rim of his coffee mug. "Madeline, what's in the envelope?" I didn't look at him. I simply said, "You'll want to read it before talking to Vanessa again." His face twitched. Not a full reaction, just enough to confirm that he hadn't told her the whole truth, if anything. Vanessa Monroe, 28, blonde, tiny teeth, faux compassionate LinkedIn posts, and 3 kids she weaponized like charm grenades. She'd started as just someone from the office, the kind of person you only mention once, casually. "Oh, Vanessa from design had an idea for the promo campaign," he said one night, stirring pasta sauce. I remember thinking her name sounded more like an interior design firm than a person. By the time she became a regular character in our life, I knew something was off. Richard laughed more around her texts than he ever did with Chloe's graduation pictures. He started wearing cologne again, a new one. And on Saturdays, his golf meetings became longer and less believable. I kept a smile on my face. That's what women like me are taught to do. Smile. Bake the bread, host the brunch, pick up the dry cleaning and your dignity all in one trip. But I was also raised by a woman who told me, if a man tries to erase you, make sure you leave ink behind. So I documented, not obsessively, strategically. Dates, statements, patterns, a receipt for a family-sized pizza order when he claimed he skipped lunch, a recurring $142.50 charge from a store called Minnie Moon's Boutique. One afternoon, I called them pretending to be a customer. They sold matching parent-child pajamas. My kids hadn't worn matching pajamas in 15 years. Meanwhile, our electricity bill went unpaid twice. One Tuesday, Richard told me our savings had taken a hit. He blamed a dip in the market. I blamed the new bunk beds I later saw on Vanessa's Instagram, staged beautifully next to a man's wrist that looked eerily like my husband's. That's when I started preparing the documents. Gregory Langford, my lawyer, had silver temples and a smirk that could level a courtroom. When I showed him what I had, he nodded like a man who'd seen this script before. "Let him keep thinking he's in charge," he told me. "The people who underestimate you are the easiest to beat." So I did. I played house while he tried to sell it. I let him kiss me on the cheek before his strategy meetings. I let him lie, just long enough to get tangled. Then I had the deed transferred, legally, carefully, and with every document cross-checked twice. That envelope on the Thanksgiving table? It contained the truth. The house wasn't his to sell anymore. He didn't know it, but 3 months ago, I moved every asset with my name on it into an irrevocable trust, one with my kids listed as primary beneficiaries. Richard was now living in a home that, on paper, no longer considered him relevant. And I waited. Not out of cruelty, but because if you're going to bury a lie, you should first make sure you're not standing in the hole yourself. People think betrayal arrives like an earthquake, sudden, loud, catastrophic. But that's not true. Betrayal creeps. It starts in whispers and forgotten glances, in laughter aimed at someone else's jokes, in conversations that shift slightly out of your reach. By the time you feel the ground shaking, the crack has already split your foundation. Richard didn't open the envelope that day, or the next. Instead, he walked around like it was radioactive. He'd pick it up, weigh it like it might tell him something by its heft, then set it back down with a kind of reverence usually reserved for family heirlooms or court summons. I said nothing. I didn't chase him for a reaction. I had learned long ago, silence unnerves men like Richard more than screaming ever could. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I caught him standing in the garage, holding the envelope like a man about to disarm a bomb. His hair was still wet from the shower. He hadn't shaved. There was a dent forming in the passenger side door of his precious Audi, something he hadn't even noticed. That night, he didn't come home. He said it was a late client dinner. But I already knew. Because Vanessa had posted a blurry boomerang of champagne glasses on her Instagram story. Same cut crystal flutes I kept locked in our china cabinet. Same table runner from Pier 1 Imports. Same wallpaper, our wallpaper. She was in our dining room, with him. He duplicated our life like it was a Pinterest board, as if his second act needed to mimic the first, but with shinier props. I didn't rage. I documented. I screen capped everything. I printed the story out and slipped it into the leather folder I kept in my closet, between our wedding photo album and the user manual for our washing machine. The irony wasn't lost on me. A week later, he finally opened the envelope. I was folding laundry upstairs when I heard the sound of tearing paper, followed by long, paralyzed silence. Then, "What the hell is this?" I came down slowly, towel still in my hand. He stood in the living room, barefoot, papers splayed across the coffee table like puzzle pieces he couldn't solve. His hands trembled. His voice was unsteady. "You transferred the deed?" "Yes," I said, as if we were discussing groceries. "To a trust? Without telling me?" "I didn't think you needed a heads up. You seemed busy, investing in bunk beds and beginner soccer cleats." His face contorted. "You planned this. You were waiting to humiliate me." "No," I said softly. "I was protecting myself. The humiliation came free of charge." He ran a hand through his hair. "Vanessa's expecting to move in by January. She's already picked out furniture." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out, dry and brittle. "She picked out furniture for a house she doesn't own? That's adorable." His nostrils flared. "You've changed, Maddie." That stopped me cold. He hadn't called me Maddie in months, maybe years. The intimacy of the nickname felt like an insult now. "No," I said quietly. "I haven't changed. I've just stopped apologizing for noticing when someone else does." He opened his mouth to respond, but his phone buzzed on the table. We both glanced down. The name Vanessa, yellow, lit up the screen. I didn't wait to hear him lie. I turned around, walked into the kitchen, and started unloading the dishwasher with the calm of a woman who has already won a war. The next morning, Chloe came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mom," she said, "are you okay?" I nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." She looked skeptical. "Dad's been calling me, and Evan. Neither of us picked up." I stopped stacking plates. "That's your choice. I won't tell you what to do. But I want you to know something. This isn't about me being angry. It's about me being awake." Chloe stepped closer. "You don't seem angry. You seem powerful." And I realized she was right. Somewhere in the slow unraveling of my marriage, I'd found something I hadn't expected to recover, myself. That afternoon, I took a drive, not to escape, but to witness. I parked across the street from a small ranch-style home in the outskirts of town, Vanessa's place. I'd never been there before, but I'd seen enough background clues in her social media to piece it together. There was a plastic tricycle tipped on the lawn, a Minion-themed birthday banner sagging on the porch, and in the front window, Richard's silhouette pacing with a baby on his hip. I sat in my car and watched the scene like I was observing a stranger, because in many ways, I was. That wasn't the man I married. That wasn't the man who had sat on hospital floors with me when Chloe had pneumonia, or the one who once cried when Evan left for college. No, that man had been replaced by someone who valued illusion over integrity and novelty over loyalty. I didn't feel rage. I felt release. Let him build his castle on sand. I was already pouring concrete for a better life. The next time Richard came home, he didn't knock. He walked in like he still lived there, which, to be fair, legally he did. Emotionally, he had left months ago. I was in the sunroom trimming the dead leaves from my lemon tree. He found me with a file folder in one hand and gardening shears in the other. His face looked pinched, gray in the late afternoon light. "I need to talk," he said. "Then talk." He hesitated. That was new. Richard never hesitated. He was the kind of man who forged ahead even when he was dead wrong, especially when he was dead wrong. "She's pregnant," he finally said. I paused. Not because I was shocked, but because the delivery of the news was so transactional, like he was updating me on a change in weather. "With her fourth child, I assume?" He blinked. "You knew?" "I'm not blind, Richard, and she's not subtle. People like Vanessa don't hide, they advertise." His shoulders sagged. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean for it to get so complicated." I set down the shears and turned to face him fully. No, I said. You meant for it to be convenient. You meant for me to sit here, smiling politely, while you played family with someone else's children in a house we built together. You wanted your life and mine, too. He took a breath. I wanted a fresh start. You don't get a fresh start by erasing someone else's past, I said, my voice like flint. You get it by facing what you broke and choosing to fix it. You never chose that. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous tic I hadn't seen in years. We need the house. Vanessa's lease is up in January. The kids, they don't have anywhere else to go. I couldn't help the short, bitter laugh that escaped me. So now it's about saving her family when you already let go of ours? He flinched, then pulled out a folder of his own. I had a lawyer draft a purchase agreement. If we can come to an amount, I held up a hand. No, Richard. His jaw clenched. Why not? This house is too big for you anyway. I stepped forward then, not aggressively, but with the quiet force of a woman who had shed her illusions. This house isn't too big. You just don't fit in it anymore. That stopped him. Dead silence. I could almost hear the click in his brain, the sound of a door finally closing. Later that night, after he'd left, Chloe knocked softly on my bedroom door. I heard, she said, about Vanessa. I nodded. He's trying to buy the house. She sat beside me, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Would you ever let him? No, I said. And not because I'm angry. I'm past angry. Then why? Because this house deserves better. And so do we. Chloe didn't respond for a long moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. Do you remember when I broke my arm in 3rd grade and you cried harder than I did? I smiled faintly. You were so brave. You just sat there with your lunch tray balanced on your lap while the nurse panicked. She nodded. I've been thinking about that a lot, about how I didn't feel pain until I saw your face. It was like your reaction gave me permission to feel what I couldn't process. What made you think of that now? Because for months, I couldn't figure out how to feel about Dad. And now I see you, steady, not broken, just standing tall. And suddenly, I know how I feel. I turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. How's that? I'm done trying to excuse him. The next day, Richard came back, but not alone. Vanessa was with him. I'd seen her pictures, heard her name 1,000 times, read her hashtags and captions and brunch photos, but this was the first time she'd stood in front of me like she belonged in my story. She was smaller than I'd imagined. Not petite, just diminished. Thin lips, pale foundation, expensive perfume that didn't mask insecurity. She tried to smile. Madeline, I'm sorry it's come to this. I raised an eyebrow. Is that an apology or an introduction? Her smile faltered. Richard jumped in. We just want to discuss options. The children have parents, I said flatly. 3, apparently. One of them just doesn't live here anymore. Vanessa opened her clutch and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This is a pre-approval letter. We can offer over market value. I'm not selling, I said simply. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. But Richard said, Richard doesn't own the house. I mean, he said he promised. I'm sure he did. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. She turned to him. You told me. I thought I could. You told me this was a sure thing. You said you had a plan. She was unraveling, and not just in front of me, but in front of herself. I took a step back and gestured toward the front door. You both should go now. Vanessa stood there for a few more seconds, then turned on her heels and stormed out. Richard followed, but not before pausing at the threshold. Are you really going to destroy everything over this? And I just looked at him, dead in the eye. I'm not destroying anything, Richard. I'm protecting what's left. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked the halls of my house. The photos still hung where I left them, Birthdays, graduations, blurry Christmas mornings. I wasn't erasing the past. I was reclaiming it, room by room, one memory at a time. After Richard and Vanessa left, the house felt strangely still. Not empty, clean. Like the air had been scrubbed free of someone else's delusion. Like their voices had been nothing more than a temporary stain on walls that already knew how to heal. The next few days were quiet. Richard stopped coming by. Chloe left for school again. Evan checked in every evening like clockwork. And me? I went back to breathing. Not out of triumph, not yet, but from the knowledge that I hadn't burned anything down. I'd simply refused to hand over the match. But that still didn't prepare me for what came next. It was a Thursday morning. I was in line at the pharmacy, picking up my allergy prescription, when I saw her, Vanessa Monroe, standing by the prenatal vitamins aisle, speaking low into her phone with the kind of intensity people reserve for legal threats and breakups. I wasn't close enough to hear every word, but her body language said plenty. Tight jaw, aggressive hand gestures, a manicured finger jabbing the air like punctuation. Then I heard something that froze me in place. "He said he's fertile. He even promised we'd start trying this month. If I can't show documentation for the custody motion, the judge won't approve relocation." Custody motion? Documentation? I pretended to browse the gum section until she walked off, her phone still clamped to her ear like it owed her money. As I walked out into the cold air, something old stirred in me, a memory, frayed and nearly forgotten. 24 years ago, after Chloe was born, emergency C-section, 2 blood transfusions, and 3 days in the NICU, Richard had started pulling away, quietly, almost unnoticeably. He blamed work, then blamed me, said maybe we were too stressed to try for a 3rd child. I'd internalized that heartbreak for years, thought it was me, that my body had betrayed both of us, that I was broken. Until one day, I walked in on a quiet conversation between Richard and our family doctor, Dr. Kramer. I hadn't heard everything, just a name, a test, and a sigh heavy enough to crack glass. I never brought it up again, until now. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the fireplace with my laptop. I found Dr. Lowell Kramer's office still practicing, his photo now showing a few more wrinkles, a few more gray hairs. I called the office the next day. "Dr. Kramer's busy," the receptionist said. "Can I take a message?" "Tell him it's Madeline Pierce," I said, steady and clear. "He delivered both of my children, and he'll know why I'm calling." There was a long pause. Then hold music. Then his voice, warm and instantly familiar. "Madeline, it's been a long time. I need to ask about Richard," I said, specifically the fertility testing he did after Chloe was born. There was silence, long enough to make me think he'd hung up. "Madeline," he said, measured and gentle, "you know I can't disclose patient records without a legal request, but hypothetically speaking, if those records were ever needed for a court-related purpose, they would still be on file." My heart was pounding. "And hypothetically," I said, "if someone submitted a subpoena as part of a divorce proceeding, they would receive a full report, including any findings that may have impacted future family planning." I thanked him, hung up, and called Gregory Langford before I even finished my tea. Gregory didn't flinch when I told him what I needed. He just said, "Do you want it delivered to your husband or to her?" "Both," I replied. "But her name's not on any legal paperwork. She's not entitled." "Then make it an anonymous tip. Or better yet, send it to her attorney. She'll open it." Gregory raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. We were well past the point of discussing ethics. This wasn't revenge. This was reality catching up. The packet was sent 2 weeks later, the same day Richard and Vanessa had planned their wedding tasting at the Magnolia Inn. I didn't hear anything right away. No angry voicemails, no texts, just silence. Until Chloe called me on a Saturday afternoon. "Mom," she said, voice thick with shock and something else. "Triumph? Vanessa left him." I blinked. What? She stormed out of the tasting, didn't even finish the entree. Dad was trying to explain something to her, but she screamed, "You lied to me! You can't even give me what I want most!" And then she slapped a folder across the table. I didn't need to ask which folder. Apparently, someone had made her a copy. I ended the call, sat in the sunroom, watched the shadows crawl across the hardwood floors like quiet applause. Richard had forgotten. He had forgotten that test ever existed. Or maybe he thought it didn't matter anymore. Or maybe, like so many men in his position, he believed history only matters if someone remembers it. But I remembered. I always had. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Not from Richard, not from the pain, but from the weight of silence I'd carried for over 2 decades. He had let me believe I was the reason we never had more children. And yet, all along, it was him. That truth didn't sting anymore. It healed, like iodine. Sharp at first, then clean. In the weeks that followed Vanessa's departure, the silence from Richard was deafening. No calls, no texts, not even one of his passive-aggressive emails beginning with "per our last conversation." He vanished, the kind of disappearance that isn't physical, but psychological, like someone closing the final tab on a web browser full of lies. I later heard from Evan that Richard had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side of town. Not exactly the dream home Vanessa had pinned on her vision board. The man who once obsessed over thread count and imported granite countertops was now living with flickering fluorescent lights and paper-thin walls. It didn't give me joy, but it gave me peace. Around that time, I began renovating the house. Not big changes, not "look what you lost" changes, just shifts. I repainted the entryway in soft sage, replaced the framed watercolor of Venice he'd picked with a blown-up black and white photo of Chloe and Evan playing in the backyard at age 5 and 7. I turned Richard's former home office into a reading room, bright, filled with plants and silence that hummed instead of echoed. Every coat of paint was a layer of reclamation. Every rearranged shelf whispered, "This is mine now." One morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Richard stood there. He looked older, and not in the refined salt and pepper way his ego would have hoped. His suit was wrinkled, shirt collar uneven, hair slightly unkempt, like he'd combed it in the car mirror. In his hand, a small paper bag. His eyes met mine briefly, then shifted down. "I brought those cinnamon rolls you used to like," he said quietly. I didn't move. He cleared his throat. "I figured maybe we could talk." I opened the screen door just enough to step outside. I didn't invite him in. We sat on the front steps like 2 kids in trouble, the bag of cinnamon rolls growing lukewarm between us. After several long beats, he finally spoke. "She's gone." I didn't reply. "She moved to Arizona with the kids. Didn't leave a forwarding address." Still, I said nothing. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Funny, huh? I torched a marriage, humiliated my children, and set fire to my own credibility for someone who didn't even say goodbye." I looked at him then, not with hatred, but with a detachment that surprised me. "That's not funny," I said. "That's math." He blinked. "What?" "Choices have weight. Consequences have mass. You carried one too long and dropped the other too late. That's just arithmetic." He stared at the sidewalk. "Do you hate me?" It was a loaded question, the kind that used to unnerve me. Not because of guilt, but because of the expectation behind it, that women should always reassure, soften, absolve. "No," I said, "I don't hate you, but I also don't owe you healing." He swallowed. "I've lost the kids." "They're not lost. They're just done being disappointed." His shoulders dropped. For the first time in a long time, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. Like a balloon after its third day in the corner of the room, still tethered, but slowly sinking. "I wish I could take it all back," he whispered. "And I wish I didn't know how empty that sentence is," I replied gently. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and said, "You should go." He looked at me one last time. "Madeline, if there's ever anything I can do—" "There is." Hope lit his eyes. "You can stop showing up." The next morning, I hosted brunch for my book club. 7 women, 2 carafes of mimosas, and a raspberry tart that Chloe had shipped in from her favorite bakery in Vermont. We laughed over terrible plot twists in the latest thriller, swapped skincare secrets, and debated whether we were too old for matching pajamas at our next retreat. Unanimous no. We ordered them anyway. Margaret, my friend since the twins were in diapers, leaned over as she reached for another strawberry. "You seem lighter lately." "I stopped holding my breath," I said, and meant it. That night, as I folded laundry in the room where Richard's dresser used to be, I found one of his old sweaters, tucked in the back of the hall closet behind a pile of winter scarves. It still smelled faintly like his cologne, cedar and ego. I held it for a moment, then placed it in the donation box without a second thought. The past wasn't a museum. It was compost, meant to feed something new. A week later, Chloe called with news. "Mom," she said, almost breathless, "you won't believe this. Dad's getting remarried again." I didn't even blink. "To who? A barista? A yoga instructor?" "Neither," she replied, deadpan. "Himself. He's hosting a recommitment ceremony to reclaim his narrative." I actually laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed about Richard in months. "Good for him," I said. "I hope he walks himself down the aisle." In the quiet that followed, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want closure. I just wanted space, air, growth, a life made of my own choices, not patchwork from someone else's indecision. And I had it. Not in the way I thought I would, but maybe in the only way that truly mattered. It's funny how silence can be the loudest thing in a room, especially when you finally made peace with it. By the time spring rolled round, the last traces of Richard had been scrubbed from the house. Not out of spite, but necessity. I wasn't erasing him. I was reclaiming space he had occupied long after he stopped belonging. The garden bloomed brighter that year. Maybe it was the extra care, maybe it was the rain, or maybe things just thrive once the roots aren't being strangled by something unseen. One Saturday in April, Evan and Chloe came over with bags of groceries and a bottle of Prosecco. No occasion, just because. We cooked, laughed, spilled sauce on the counter like old times, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the house sounded like home again. After dinner, we sat on the back patio with candles flickering in mason jars and blankets around our legs. Chloe leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know what I realized?" she said. "We're not broken." I smiled. We were never broken, just misled. Evan raised his glass. "To recalibrating." We clinked. "To recalibrating." 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Thick, creamy cardstock embossed with elegant gold lettering. A wedding invitation. "Hunter Pierce and Sarah Bellamy request the honor of your presence." Hunter was Richard's nephew. He and Chloe had been close as kids. I hadn't seen him in years. I flipped to the second card. Father of the groom, Richard Pierce. So he still had family somewhere willing to pretend. I considered declining, but something inside me said go. Not for Richard, not for some grand scene, but because this was still part of my story. I had the right to walk into a room and not shrink just because someone else was uncomfortable. The day of the wedding was warm, breezy, full of dogwood blossoms and polite laughter. I wore a navy dress, soft pearl earrings, and a confidence that wasn't rehearsed anymore. Richard was already seated near the front when I arrived. He saw me, stood up slowly, nodded. I nodded back. No bitterness, No history clawing at my throat, just two people who once built something and then let it rot. During the reception, Chloe danced barefoot on the lawn, and Evan held court at the bar. I sipped champagne by the koi pond and watched dragonflies skim the water. Gregory Langford appeared beside me with 2 glasses of wine. "You look whole," he said. "I am," I replied, and it felt true all the way down to my ribs. He smiled, held out the second glass. "I was thinking," he said, "when you're ready, there's a photography exhibit in the city next weekend. You might like it." I accepted the wine. I just might. And just like that, my story didn't end with heartbreak. It ended with a quiet breath, a new page, a second draft written entirely by me. Not perfect, not polished, but mine. And finally, that was enough.
So, what do you think? Was Madeline right to hold her ground? Would you have done the same? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If the story made you feel anything, anger, peace, even a little justice, hit that like button to show you're with her. And don't forget to subscribe. There's another story coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know.